What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's your boy Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast, episode whatever episode it is. And we're coming at you on the 4th of February. Hasn't this year already started going pretty quickly? Fresh off that Brazilian fight night, which I said I'd do a preview for and actually didn't. But what a banger. We always knew it was a bit of a nerd's card, one for the non-McGregor fan, one for the guy who thought MMA was cool before you did. Sort of like alternate fighters, and Aldo, but you had Moicano, Marlon Mariah, a Sun Sao, and even a Sun Sao's own mum doesn't really like watching a Sun Sao fight, but it was a good one for the nerds, so we'll talk about that later, because I'm sure you're here to nerd out, but for those of you who are here for my outrageous takes on the news, we'll get into that first. So what's going on? Duffy versus Jacasey has just been signed for the London card. That card's out. They're already selling tickets on like the advanced buying thing. The tickets are already, all bought up by Ticketmaster and marked up by 40-50 quid. And yet they're still adding fights to. I don't know what's going on. They really must be going all in on this like last card before Brexit thing. But yeah, that looks incredible. And yeah, no soft fights for Mark Jacasey, having had the two rough ones against Dan Hooker and Halal Kelvin Gastelum. He's straight back in it with Joe Duffy, and Joe Duffy, he was on the way up for quite a while. Had that great fight with Poirier, but he had a bad loss recently. But like he was super hot prospect, and now they're just straight back in with another monster. But that's the lightweight division in a nutshell. As we found out this weekend, Charles Oliveira versus David Tamer, and I don't think either of them was ranked in the top 15. That's how good that division is. Absolutely insane. What else has been announced? Oh, Sadiq Youssef, boy of the podcast, Mr. Black Explosive himself, takes on Shayman Mariah, another very exciting fighter, at UFC Philly. That's a banger of a fight. Two up-and-coming featherweights going at it. Sadder fight news, Thomas Almeida is out of his fight with Chito Vera at UFC 235. That also was going to be a banger. So many good fights going on at the moment, and of course, that's the way it's always been recently. Good fights are booked and only half of them go through, but that's just the expected dropout rate in this sport. And then dropout for a different reason. I don't know if the reason was ever given, but Holly Holm versus Aspen Ladd is off. And I know what you're thinking, okay, Aspen Ladd moves forward. No, Holly Holm moves forward. She's got a fight against Amanda Nunes. Miss Undeserved title fight. She is Uriah Faber 2.0. But hot. Mind you, Liz Carmouche was all right looking, and also looked like Uriah Faber, so maybe that was her. But yeah, just absolutely bizarre. But it just shows how good Nunes is. She's beaten every top name in women's MMA, and well, if she beats Holly, she's also beaten another one. And we still don't care much. Holly Holm's in a strange position, actually, because I think they just announced her divorce, and it wasn't too long ago, after she won the title from Ronda, she was talking about retiring to start a family. And now she's, like, coming up on 40, so weird situation. Especially, that's something that male fighters don't really have to deal with. Randy Couture could retire at 46 and then go and have another baby if he wanted to, with his always alarmingly younger wife. Actually, Hendo, the same thing. But yeah, that's the whole thing that women athletes have to think about. There was a great story a few years back about a female weightlifter training on some country's Olympic team. Her water broke doing a snatch, and she had the baby like shortly after, and she didn't even know she was pregnant. And one, pretty hard to miss the bump, you'd think, but then if you're a heavy lifter, then maybe so. But also that, famously, various anabolics will fuck up your menstrual cycle. So if you didn't have a period for like 9 months and you didn't think it was an issue, that might be why. Oh, how do we get onto periods? Anyway, yeah, it's a shame, because I like Aspen Ladd. She's actually been setting I was going to say setting the world on fire, and then I was going to walk it back to setting that division on fire, but that division's only like 3 people. But she's really quite exciting, and I was keen to see her against Holly Holm. But then at least you don't get Holly Holm knocking off another contender in a fairly mediocre fight. Though I would love it, because Holly's my girl. I would love it if she came out and just smoked Amanda Nunes. How funny would that be? be like, she's provably the best female fighter of all time, but also has perhaps the most losses in the UFC of any female fighter of all time, except maybe Angela Magana. What else is going on? Oh, Jiri and King Mo signed at Rising. That's not interesting for the average person, but if you like Jiri, like I do, then that's quite interesting. But King Mo is pretty much washed at this point. If he beats Jiri, that's really a sign that Jiri's not going to make it as a big-time light heavyweight. Paige Van Zandt's husband, Austin Vanderford, has been signed by Bellator and is set to make his Bellator debut on the 15th of February. And you've got to hope that Paige Van Zandt's going to jump the fence and cause some drama there. The director of Narcos is now doing a Gracie Family, I was going to say documentary, fucking hell, Gracie Family's Mythos series for Netflix, which has potential, but really, it only has potential if they're actually doing the research in things like Choke, the series of books that chap did, and reading newspapers and actually putting together a decent program. What is probably going to happen is that Horian and Henna and Half, whichever one's the Horian's sons, are going to be signed on as paid consultants or researchers or whatever, and it will be the Gracie family myth. Helio Gracie will be 90 pounds, will have never done a day's exercise in his life, and Masahiko Kimura will be 8 feet tall and shoot lasers from his eyes. And they won't beat that guy in the kneecaps with a pipe because he beat Carlson in a fight. But yeah, that'll be shit, so don't look forward to it. And then final piece of news, of course, McGregor and Habib sorted out their settlements. I think Habib had to pay like $500,000, but people getting upset about that. He did try and jump on a dude. Whatever they get, good. And then Jones has sorted it so that he can apply for a one-off fight license against Anthony Smith for the upcoming title defense. Oh, and then I forgot to mention on the subject of McGregor, if you've heard, things aren't great in England at the moment, or Britain, sorry. We are in the middle of a Brexit, or rather we are heading towards a Brexit with no plan. So we got a break from that in the tabloids this week, when instead of actually talking about how disastrous our democracy is and how shit our government is, all of them, all the Commons, they decided to run a full front page piece on two of the papers about the McGregor paternity palaver. If you saw this a while ago, there's some bint on Instagram being like, "I've got a baby, it's Connor's. Here's some photos of Connor with his hand up my skirt." And then she put on Instagram photos of the conversation with Connor, where Connor's like, "Show me the baby," and then she's like, "Here's the baby," and he's like, "Oh, he's adorable," and then he's like, "Oh, he's not mine though." And just anyone who's looking at this from outside is like, "Yeah, he's probably dead." Oh, but then he was at the Super Bowl this week with his actual son, accepted son, whichever, in matching paisley blazers. Anyway, let's talk about those fights that happened at the weekend. I enjoyed this card quite a lot. There's a couple I skipped on here, the early prelims. What were they? Oh no, I saw Nurmagomedov. Said Nurmagomedov versus Ricardo Ramos, or Ricardo Hamas. Liked this. Liked what I saw from Nurmagomedov, using the jab to set up the spinning back kick. Really was a spinning back kick and not a turning side kick. He was spinning like a top in there. Referee for this one, notably sort of like a darker Scott Coker. So Said Nurmagomedov gets to work with his kicks, and he did a nice step up lead leg feint into a switch kick at 1.2. Lands that back kick about 3 times to the body. Third time sends Ramos into the cage and follows up with punches, and Mocha Coca steps in to stop him. Not a bad performance out of him, I thought. De Freitas versus Colares, that was where the prelims rather than the early prelims started, and that was an odd one because De Freitas kept boxing him up and then diving on a takedown when he had him hurt, and I think that might be, that could have been nerves, that could have been consciousness of cardio. He could have not wanted to waste energy swinging wild at a dude who's quite tough. Instead, just took a free takedown each time. Got a breather on the mat, but De Freitas also kept going for submissions, like he'd go for an armbar or climb on the back and start working for a rear naked choke, and every time he'd end up with Colares in his closed guard. From a tactical point of view, De Freitas was very bad, but he was also much better than this dude throughout in pretty much every area. Then you had Jairzinho Rosenstruck, one of those weird half South American, half German names, against Junior Albini, the big baby. and Albini decided to wrestle him. Apparently he's been working at American Top Team, so he took him down, got all over him. There was a point where Rosenstruck was turtled, and Albini pulled him back over his heels, which is one that they always tell you not to do in like the gym, because you'll tear someone's ACL or just fuck up their knee generally, pulling them back over the butt over heels. And I was watching Junior Albini, who's like 250, 60 pounds, go over this guy's knee, and I was just like, fuck, having that happen. That's awful. But yeah, Rosenstruck weathers the storm, gets up, knocks Albini senseless with a head kick and punches. Very impressive, in a really unimpressive heavyweight sort of way. On to the good stuff now. We're talking Thiago Alves versus Max Griffin. I liked this a lot. I jokingly called this the fight to decide who's the better out of people that Curtis Millender's beaten. Love Curtis Millender. Working on a study of him for probably the Patreon boys at some point. But yeah, he's beaten both these guys. Max Griffin, interesting. Got that weird like American kickboxing style. Really grimaces every time he throws a punch, and sort of has his head up in the air after his punches, which is where Aldo wouldn't touch him because he's like half the size. Alves was catching him after Griffin had thrown his jab or his right hand, and then catching him on the way back. But he was doing a really good job of floating in and out. Really clearly had an edge in speed in the early going on Alves, but then that is often to be expected with a guy like Alves who's just been doing this so long. Knocked down Alves. Alves did a really good job of recovering and getting to work, pressuring Griffin in the second round. And it was very similar to the fight with Millender, actually. Millender was just too far away a lot of the time for Alves. And when he had success was when he stopped trying to kick Millender's lead leg, because Millender would withdraw it and then come back with a strike of his own, or just check and counter, and that's where Alves was getting hurt. Instead, Alves started stepping in, and he'd used the step-up left kick to either the body or the back leg, and that's when he could actually get Millender into exchanges. Problem was that Millender then timed him with a knee as he came in and knocked him out. But that step-up left kick, really nice technique that Alves doesn't use as often because he likes to kick the inside of the leg and come down with the jab or with the overhand right. A couple of those body kicks seemed to wind Griffin. One of them caught him because he was moving back. It caught him sort of glancingly, but right in the solar plexus rather than just thudding into his side like it would have if he was standing still. I did think that Griffin probably did enough to win this one. I joined the sort of chorus of people who were upset at the judges. I don't know if the judges were Brazilian, but even non-Brazilian judges, if you're in Brazil, it's got to be tempting to score for the Brazilian. Yeah, no, I thought that was a really good performance of Max Griffin. I thought it was a good, Thiago Alves has for years been putting on these performances where he isn't quite as good as he used to be. When he had those gigantic pecs, mysteriously, and struggled to make welterweight. He's not been that good for years, but he has constantly been gritting his teeth and pulling through in these fights. Like, even when he came back from his long time off, was that the brain tumor? No, brain tumor was before the George St. Pierre fight. He's had some bad luck. But when he came back after that long injury and he fought Seth Basinski and whoever that other lad was, got boxed up by both of them and just pulled it out by staying on them and being savvy. So this really was like a guy in Alves who's sort of coming down from the top, and a guy in Griffin who's got a lot of potential but hasn't really put it all together perfectly yet. But yeah, eyes on Max Griffin for the future, and good on Thiago Alves. If he can keep it up, I'm not going to complain about him still fighting. Mario Romero, skip that one. Marcus Perez versus Anthony Hernandez. Perez is a very striking looking guy. He looks like everyone in the 80s and 90s thought that martial artists should look like. I remembered him. I couldn't remember why I remembered him, but there was something about him that I remembered, and I think it was something like about his hands being floppy. But he looked all right in this one. Beautiful work to stun Hernandez and then punch straight through on that anaconda choke, which we're going to be talking about later with Charles Oliveira and David Tamer. Guys are hooking that up standing now, and it's working so well, especially if you rice bale roll through and then kick the leg over to knock the arm into position. That Rafa Mendes favourite, the Rafa Conda they used to call it, or Hafaconda. Livia Hinata Souza versus Sarah Fronta, skip that one. Johnny Walker versus Justin Ledet, let's talk about this. Johnny Walker, I like that lad. Seeing him smile is so infectious. And the dancing he does on the way to the ring. And someone linked this week, episode of You Seen This Shit for this week is Johnny Walker's stripper entrance from a regional show where he comes out in like t-shirt and joggers, but they're tearaway stripper pants. And he's also got the cuffs and the collar and the bow tie on. And he's down to just his fighting shorts and the collar and the cuffs, and they make him take them off, which is really sad. I would love to see him fight in like naked butler attire. But yeah, this was the old Kung Lee special. Throw out that side kick or the hook kick. It was a hook kick in this case. Hook kick is probably better for forcing the setup, but it works off the side kick too. If you miss one of those kicks that's coming in from that direction and the opponent steps down the back, that's very, very bad for you. However, if you spin into them, you can knock their head off. Korean Zombie did it to some Thai champion on short notice as a complete upset, but also it was illegal and he got DQ'd. But people lost their shit when he did it back in the day. But yeah, Kung Lee did it to knock down Wanderlei Silva with it when he missed he got a sidekick parried. He did it to Frank Shamrock off a parried sidekick and also off a hook kick. He went straight into it. Don't see Stephen Thompson do it that much, which is something you'd think he could do. But he tends to, if the sidekick glances off, he just runs a mile. He'll turn his back and run. Never really want to give up that angle at any cost unless you're spinning through for the back fist. So now Johnny Walker, 2 knockout victories in the UFC, and I still know fucking nothing about him because his fights have gone like a minute tops. Well, that one was 15 seconds, so that's pretty incredible. Talk about him fighting John Jones now. I just haven't seen enough of him. Maybe that's good if he comes in as an unknown and surprises John Jones with something. But I've just not seen people lean on him. I've not really seen him take any strikes. He's just like got no idea what he can actually deal with. But that's the sort of contender that people can get behind. Charles Oliveira versus David Teymur. This was a good fight, marred by both of them gouging each other's eyes. To be fair, Oliveira's was done with a toe, so you can't really do a lot about that. But after he did it, Teymur's eye just blew up. But Teymur did stick his fingers in Oliveira's eyes, both of them, twice. So yeah, that was a little bit bad. Happened very early on in the first round, and you're glad the ref made him take all that time to rest. But if you've got a guy like Charles Oliveira, basically in tears, you've pretty much just stuck your fingers up to the knuckle in his eye. But Oliveira rallied, put the pressure on him very nicely. Teymur, obviously wants to kick. If you put the pressure on him a bit, it's going to make it harder. Interesting that when he got a hold, well, he was trying to enter on clinches straight into the double collar tie, that shootbox style. But that pairs well with Oliveira's snap down game because he loves to snap dudes down. If they stand up, he uses those horizontal elbows, the Johnny Walker elbows, if you will, to cut them up. But by pursuing that nice high clinch, he could avoid what happened to Lando Venata every time he ducked into a clinch. Teymur would just throw his hips back, clamp down on the whizzer, put his head in front of Venata's and knee the shit out of his gut. Some of the best knees that I've seen from a Muay Thai sense in MMA recently, to be honest, like up there with Leon Edwards versus Cerrone. Same position. But it really just showed the confidence that being the better grappler gives you, because Oliveira was able to open up so much more freely than Teymur was. Teymur was a little bit like 1 or 2 punches at a time, and then I've got to run because I can't be dragged into a clinch. Or I've really got to get my space before I kick. There was a nice left hand that hit him right down the centre that hit Oliveira while he was on one leg kicking. He took that marvellously for what it was, because those are the ones that just knock out dudes a lot of the time. I think it helps that guys like Teymur aren't going to jump straight into his guard to try and finish him. The old big nog trick, like when Heath Herring basically knocked him out in their third fight, and then was like, "Stand up, I'm not jumping on you." But Oliveira stunned him. He turned his back, which was not good. They allow you to do that in MMA. In boxing, that's like instant loss, basically. But Teymur turned his back. He really had his bell rung, and then finally turned back in, got an underhook. Oliveira snaps him down, punches straight through for the anaconda. Obviously, having long arms helps you there, but you'll see guys like him and Ortega, and obviously Perez in the earlier fight. Only 2 fights before this, but punching straight up to the elbow, for the anaconda position, and then rolling the dude and using the legs to move him into a more favourable choking position. And a lot of guys are good at just coming up off the anaconda. If you can use it to roll and get on top, that's just as legit. As I said, Hernandez in 2009 ADCC, he'd go from top half guard using that technique. He'd roll over the top of them into like a, where both of you are looking up at the ceiling and your feet are facing separate ways. And then he'd roll back into mount or whatever to try and finish. There's a great one from I think it was Ortega versus Brandao. He rolls him with, I think it was the Anaconda, and then rolls up on top of him into a triangle choke while mounted, like a leg triangle rather than an arm triangle. That's very cool. Yeah, like I said, this was last year's, not last year, 2017 breakout technique of the year. Fluid front headlock work, and especially the Anaconda choke and the rolling Anaconda choke. And basically 2 in the same few hours in this event, which is awesome. Damian Maia versus Lyman Good, another feel-good one for us Maia fans. Michael Bisping was on commentary for this event. He wasn't bad, actually. He did keep saying, like, I know all about that. And the guy, who was he with? The guy with the really wide eyes, got the margins on narrow. Old wide face is like, you would know, champ. And then Bisping's like, I would know. It's just getting dangerously close to size of the dog in the fight, Goldie, Big John territory there. But Bisping said he's going to move him to the fence and immediately shoot the single leg. And it looked like he was clairvoyant, but then you remembered that's actually what Damian Maia's done in every fight for the last 5 years. Shoots the single leg, pushes Lyman to the fence, takes Lyman down. Lyman does a good job of I'm saying Lyman instead of Good. I know it's always tricky in writing things. Using people's first names makes it look like you favour them. I'm not going to keep calling him Good though, because I was saying Good did a good job. Lyman did a good job of pushing the head away and getting his hips free, because Damian Maia obviously likes to bundle up the legs and try and tripod and walk around that way. Look, Maia got his fingers caught in the shorts at one point, and I was like, is Damian Maia grabbing shorts? Damian, we think you're better than that. And then it was very clear that he was like, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to grab your shorts, and let go. And you're like, classy Damian Maia. But yeah, as soon as he gets that body lock, where he's sort of on the back, but sort of round to the side, and the guy's leaning against the fence, Damian Maia is on the right side of Good, behind him with the body lock. He puts his right foot inside of Good's right foot, and then he uses his left foot to just pull the ankle out. It's the most half-assed fake trip you've ever seen, but Lyman Good throws himself forwards to counterbalance and not be taken down. And he'd probably be better on his back at that point, but he throws himself forward, and Damian Maia just steps into back control. Just beautiful. There is no one better in MMA at getting on dudes' backs or just forcing their way onto dudes' backs than Damian Maia. Absolute magic. If this guy ever puts out a no-gi DVD, because his old DVDs back in the day, when he was still like a jiu-jitsu phenom, were really good. Like lots of just conceptual stuff. If he ever puts out a no-gi DVD, he will make a fortune. Then you had the co-main event, Jose Aldo versus Renato Moicano. I made the mistake of writing a full one-fighter highlight piece. You know, it was a full study on Renato Moicano's style, wherein I wrote, I'm only saying this because we've already talked about Aldo 100 times. If Aldo beats this guy, that's how good Jose Aldo is, even at this advanced age. And then I got a flood of people saying, you told me that Jose Aldo was a worse striker than Moicano. And I'm like, no, I fucking didn't. Firstly, I'm never going to call anyone a better striker and not talk about why. Renato Moicano, very nice feints and things like that. Very scientific striker, but I think I said all the way through, Jose Aldo is incredibly explosive, probably has the edge on him in power and speed, and then that was what got Moicano caught. If you watch the worst part is people after this being like, there are levels to this, and you're like, did you watch the first round? Because the first round was started out almost nothing happening. I was like, is Moicano a little bit scared here? And then Moicano starts fainting, and then when he's fainting, Aldo's doing the big head movements, you know, the reactionary head movement, throwing himself way off to the side, and then Moicano's catching him with jabs and stuff. He's getting Aldo to swing big left hooks and countering him with shorter left hooks. That first round, really good stuff from Moicano. I thought he had him worked out by the end of the first, and then Aldo comes out, hits him with a Hail Mary in the second round with a lovely long left hook, immediately digs to the body while Moicano's covering up his head, and then swarms for the finish. If you watched that and thought there are levels to this shit, then you don't know what you're watching, mate. But I thought that was brilliant from Jose Aldo. He's just so exciting at the moment, and he says he doesn't want to pursue another title. He says he's only got, I think he said 3 more fights, so that would be down to 2 now in the UFC, or ever in his career. But what's so interesting is that Aldo now, I mean, it all matches up with that old Archie Moore thing that he told Muhammad Ali when Muhammad Ali didn't want to hear it. The older you get, the more you want to rely on your power. You know, the more you want to end the fights early. You don't want to be dancing around forever. And the rub on Aldo was always a lack of urgency, a lack of desire to finish a lot of the time. And thinking specifically of fights like Hominick and especially Lamas, you know, The Lammers fight, he was so clearly in control. He was so clearly better than the dude in an awful lot of areas, maybe every area. You know, he was outstriking him at will. When he decided to throw him on his back, he immediately mounted him just on like a whim. And then he just sort of didn't like push his advantages at any stage. It was like, I'm the champion. I'm going to be the champion at the end of this fight. I don't really need to chase a finish. Whereas on the way up through WEC, he was just like a finishing madman. I get the sense that, well, it could be that the stress of the title is off his head, which would be nice. But I get the sense that maybe being a little bit concerned about not being that much better than guys is making him more dangerous. You know, that sense, because he's training every day. He'll know that he's slowing down a bit and this, that, and the other. I think maybe not being the absolute best in the world and miles ahead of everyone else is making him fight in a more dangerous way for his opponents. But it's fascinating to watch regardless. Just wondering who these next two are. I was writing my recap and then Vice closed down overnight, so I didn't actually get to publish it. But I basically wrote, you know, if Aldo comes in like that, you know, two more up-and-coming prospects are going to have to deal with taking that L until he retires. Just marvellous stuff from him. And then the main event, Marlon Moraes, who should be called Marlon Moraes, against Rafael Assunção. Assunção is Mr. Spoiler, and he came out doing exactly what he does. You know, ball to the back foot, pop in a quick 1-2, slam in the stopping kick to the knee when Marlon Moraes comes back. And Moraes did a very good job of not doing what he did in the first fight, and everyone else does against Assunção, where the output goes down. You're like, this guy's awkward, I'm annoyed. And then the output just goes down. He, from the start, was looking for big counters, and that was good. And he dug a nice body kick. I think he got a good leg kick off. Countered with a nice uppercut left hook as soon as Assunção stepped in on him. He countered with an uppercut left hook at one point. Assunção steps back. Assunção drops his hands like, okay, cool, back to feeling each other out. And that's when Mariah just cracks him with an overhand. And then another one. You know, it's like, just caught him taking a break. Sent him to the mat. And Assunção played very well, I thought, his guard, given that he was hurt. Because he went to the butterflies, because that's what you want to do to stand up. And then he realised, oh no, I'm hurt. So he went to closed guard and held Mariah still. Mariah pushed forward to half guard. He used the half guard to push back to the closed guard again. And then when he had Mariah controlled and not punching, he went, okay, I'm ready to get up now, and went to the butterflies. Problem was, Mariah was razor sharp and realised, and as soon as Assunção starts getting up on his side, he throws the armpit over the head, gets the guillotine grip, and starts trying to strangle him. And he went to his back to try and finish it. Respect. Well, I say respect. That's also the number one MMA fan, like, oh my god, I can't believe he did that when they lose the round later. But he went to his back, and then Assunção rolled through, which is how you know the choke's on. If the guy rolls to his back to take the pressure off, you've got him, basically. Marvellous stuff from Marlon Moraes. I'm just wondering who's going to jump him in the queue for the title shots. I mean, it can't be Garbrandt at this point, and Cruz is pretty safely out of action. So I reckon they'll do Cejudo at bantamweight and shut down the flyweight division, if I'm honest. But I'm, happy to see if they keep the flyweight division going. Just sucks a bit for Henry Cejudo if you beat the bantamweight champion and you don't get the bantamweight belt or at least a shot at it. So who won the bonuses? Oh, Moraes, obviously. They gave 3 performances of the night. Jose Aldo and Johnny Walker. And then Oliveira versus Tamer won fight of the night. Yeah, I would get Tamer versus Oliveira or Griffin versus Alves. I would have been happy with either of those winning fight of the night, to be honest. But a good night of fights. What's next? What's next for people then? I think from Mariah, I want the title shot so badly. Assunção is back into the blur where he's good enough to beat almost everyone, but he's never going to get anywhere near that title shot, especially as he just lost this non-title fight. Aldo has specifically said he doesn't want to pursue the title, which means that Renato Moicano can't go after the title right now, has to do a bit more. Everyone just sort of moves back from that affair, which is hilarious. Damian Maia, you're not going to be... Just don't give him any more wrestlers. We just want to see him against, like, bangers. Give him Mike Perry or something. Lyman good. No one really minds where he goes. Oliveira, is that 2 in, like, the space of 3 months? Because he beat Jim Miller just, like, the other day. Oh, okay, that was December. So he's fought 4 times in the last year. Just a beast. Give that man a top 10 ranked opponent, I say. Let's do some questions before we get out of here, and then we'll come back and do a big preview on the upcoming UFC 234 card, which looks amazing. And I'm so hot on the middleweight division right now. thank you to Oceania or Australasia for saving it. Hey, Mr. Slack, big fan. Have you been watching this somewhat career resurgence of Alexander Emelianenko? And do you think his current win streak, 5-0-1, 5 KOs and a draw, I thought he won, has anything to do with technique refinement, or is it simply roids? He's definitely in better shape and winning consistently. Crushed Gonzaga, but then again, who doesn't these days? Cheers from Savage. I have been cautiously watching it in a hands-off sort of way. I don't think I've seen all 6 of his fights since his comeback, but I have seen a few of them. And yeah, the thing is, I want to hate him because he's did he kidnap that woman? And then I think he was a rapist too. Yeah, well, basically, he went to prison for very nasty stuff to do with abusing someone in a much weaker situation. You know, he's a heavyweight fighter, and this was his cleaning lady or some shit. But he, watching him, he still has hands. He's still very quick. And, the hands aren't going to be something that he loses in prison even, because if you can box in prison. Yeah, his hands are very slick for a heavyweight. And he is in incredible shape. And yeah, he's roiding to the gills, but it's outside of the UFC. There's no USADA testing. It's outside of America. There's no commission testing, so he can just do whatever he wants. His opponents can do whatever they want. So you're on a pretty level playing field. Yeah, I think he's good. I think the problem is that there are no good heavyweights outside of the UFC and Bellator. Well, even Bellator's got... Well, in the UFC and Bellator, there are still a lot of bad heavyweights. But basically, it's like that Geronimo dos Santos cutoff point we were talking about. You're either beaten Geronimo dos Santos and you're in the UFC or Bellator, or you're not and you're a bum, basically. He's always going to be stuck, basically, because of not just his criminal record, but also his failed medicals in the US, and he couldn't get licensed for that affliction event. Had hep. I think he had the curable hep as opposed to the chronic hep, but that's never good. But it's mainly the criminal thing that's going to stick to him, and there are crimes that you can rebound from, and there are crimes that are going to be very hard to rebound from. Mind you, with the whole Greg Hardy thing and various other fighters being in trouble over various other offences against women that may or may not have occurred, who knows? Again, Mike Tyson we all love now, and he was tried for rape. It's a complicated situation. It is a guilty pleasure for me watching Alexander Emelianenko fight, because I don't like him, but I do like watching him fight. He's got some beastly hands on him. I think that's always was going to be the way that Alexander Emelianenko's career went, though, because Fedor was pretty prescient of this. He was like, Alex doesn't take things seriously. People were like, do you train with Alex anymore? He was like, no, Alex barely trains. And now Alex at coming up on 40 is taking his career seriously, which as a heavyweight, fair enough, because that's what all the heavyweights in the UFC are. They're 40 something. But he has left it very late in the day to decide, okay, I'm serious about this now. I want to know what the other Emelianenko brother's up to. Is it Ivan, the one that they always showed with them, who isn't anywhere close to the size of the other two? They're like, yeah, he's going to make his debut this year, next year, couple of years' time. It never happened. Anyway, cheers, Savage. Hey Jack, I'm a Muay Thai fighter and my next opponent has a big looping right hand, i.e. more Deontay Wilder than straight right. What is the best offense slash defense against this strike? I have a very squared stance and... I thought he was going to say, I have a very high chin and I'd like to stand square on with my feet right under me. Now, I have a very squared stance and was planning on just pinning my left hand to my head for the whole fight. Cheers from Chris. Yeah, I mean, that works. As long as you're doing stuff back, as long as you're not just taking right hands and letting him load up other right hands. The whole thing about defense is that if you can't turn it into offense, really all you're doing is pinning your hands in place. That's one of the reasons that I've always preferred the sort of stonewall shoulder roll style of boxing, because with your lead hand down, you feel ready to come back with the left hook, and you've already turned away, so you're ready to come back with the right hand. Whereas if you're blocking with your left hand, I always feel like I can only really come back with the right hand, and even then, it just feels a little bit more limiting to me. That could be an entirely psychological thing for me myself, but I always think, what's the best platform for counter-offense rather than where am I safest? Even though, defense is the most important thing, but it doesn't win fights. There are lots of interesting counters that you can use against a big right hand, particularly if you've got, if you're in... I'm assuming this is a Muay Thai fight. Could be an MMA fight, but he says Muay Thai fighter. But if you've got options, there's tons of stuff you can do against him. You could raise the lead elbow like you're planning to catch the right hand and try and step inside so that the elbow connects with his head when you step in, and then try and pick up a clinch. You can throw the left arm straight out over his shoulder, the Daniel Cormier style, and bar the arm and then step into the clinch. You can bar the arm and throw an inside low kick on his lead leg, especially if guys step deep with that right hand, which is how you get power on a big booming overhand, right? The guys will step with it, like out to a little 45-degree angle or whatever. If you kick inside the lead leg when they do that, you'll send them sprawling, and you can come back with like uppercuts or right hands and all sorts. If you watch Mike Zambides versus Buakaw, he does that. That's like a Thai favorite against the big overhand right. Throw the left hand out over the shoulder, stiff arm style, and punt the lead leg out. Just every time they step onto it. That can be combined with just like teeping them in the stomach every time they try and throw the overhand, just folding them over. If you've got a good right uppercut, you can do the Frankie Edgar versus Faber. You catch with the left forearm high or the left elbow high, left hand pin to your head, whatever, and then come with the right uppercut as they recover their position, because you're going to lean forward for an overhand a lot of the time. You could just bar the shot over the shoulder with like a leverage guard and then step straight into the double collar tie or a single collar tie and start elbowing with the right elbow, that's the one. If you're feeling really cocky, you can try and do the Bas Rutten favourite, which is to stand square. If you stand square, this is a good start for you anyway. Stand square, try and draw the right hand, and then you bar the right hand, or you can parry the right hand, but I think barring the right hand is probably better. You bar the right hand, step to your right with your right foot, and punt them in the ribs as hard as you can on that side they're throwing the punch. There's lots of different... One of the things about the overhand is that it's very scary, but it's one of those techniques that you can counter with every limb in pretty much every direction of throwing it off that right hand, as long as you're training for it. Putting in the practice on it is probably the most important thing. Don't try and do 8 different things. Pick like 2 things and then work them on the pads and in sparring until you can. And even then, you can always take the first round to just defend the right hand, not come back with counters, and then work on exploiting it once you've got the timing down or he's slowed down a bit. Anyway, cheers, Chris. Hey, Jack, big fan of the podcast. Often I hear people talk about what would happen if Mike Tyson fought in MMA. Although we'll never know, I was wondering about the more general principle of how his Peekaboo style could work in an MMA context. We've been given glimpses of Peekaboo in MMA, like Bochniak versus Zabit, where it was largely unsuccessful. What would you add to a Peekaboo boxer's skill set that would allow him to perform well in MMA? For instance, I think if Bochniak had wrestling, kicking him to keep distance would be more risky. So this could force the taller man to step in and jab instead, and that would create openings for the overhand, etc. Thank you for reading this, and keep up the great work. Regards, Tommy. Miguel Torres used to do like a peekaboo sort of stance. The peekaboo style as Customato came up with was all about moving your head a lot and just being elusive. And moving your head on your punches, which was, can be a little bit more awkward than punching and then moving your head. If you watch Customato teach the jab, he's almost always throwing a dipping jab, whether it's to the head or the body. If you watch him or Kevin Rooney teaching the jab, they'll start in a very squared stance and they'll almost jump both feet out to do the jab. A very weird sort of style. And there's all sorts of people claiming to teach it. I suppose if you're talking about the Customato sort of style, there aren't really any... Well, there are still guys who worked with Customato, but they haven't had anywhere near the same success as he did with Patterson, Torres, and Tyson. And then, Peekaboo, the press really just used it to refer to the glove position rather than the style itself. The glove position really doesn't matter all that much in MMA because you don't really want to be catching things on your gloves anyway. So whether you're in like an earmuffs or a Peekaboo style or whatever, you're probably better off in a more classical down behind the lead shoulder stance. The squaring up tends to like leave the chin out in front of you. There's no big bones between your chin and the path of like a right hook. However, there are guys like Mike Zambides. People used to love claiming that he was a Peekaboo style fighter because he kept his gloves tight to his chin and he used to throw lots of hooks and do that in kickboxing. I think head movement in MMA is just pretty mediocre anyway. There's not a lot of guys doing a lot of good head movement. But I think the other problem is that to do the sort of D'Amato style head movement, you're supposed to be moving your head pretty much all the time. You're supposed to be trying to be elusive. You're not waiting, like we talk about with Aldo, where he waits for the punch and then moves his head. You're moving your head to be hard to hit. And then if they throw a punch and miss it, you've got that opportunity to counter. You're not waiting and then slipping and then coming back with the counter. In MMA, head movement is obviously, we always talk about it, a little bit more dangerous because of, firstly, kicks if you dip deep. The Tyson style particularly had very deep dips straight to the side. Rather than turning the body and leaning forward a little bit, which is like a classical slip, he would bend sideways at the waist and hips. He'd like throw his hips out to the other side. And that meant that he could, if he wanted to slip to the right, if you're slipping to the right in a classical way, you're sort of turning your body and bending a little bit. If you're slipping to the right in a D'Amato style way, you're bending sideways so that a left hook could go over the top of you. That side to side slipping to avoid even circular punches from the side. Now, when you're talking about that, kicks are obviously one concern, but the other concern is, of course, that if every time you take your head off the center line and down deep into a side, the other guy in MMA can put his hand on it. He can post on your head, he can lean on you, he can take you out of position, keep you out of position, start like trying to throw knees at your head and things. Igor Vovchanchyn used to duck out of his combinations and things like that, and even Gary Goodridge, who was not a very good kickboxer, had a lot of success just able to finish his combinations and duck, and then he'd try and knee him. Curtis Millender just stopped Alves the same way. Dan Hooker stopped Ross Pearson the same way. If you come in, Ross Pearson's probably your best example in MMA, to be honest, because he really did well on the inside slip of the left hook and moved his head a lot. Didn't really do sideways bends, was really more of like a classical slipper, but that slip into the left hook is like the staple Tyson and Patterson and Torres technique. And Pearson has been the best at that in MMA, I'd say. And to be fair, it carried a lot of his career. Like, if you can do that well, if you can slip and come back with the left hook, you are laughing. Like, you could be much worse in every other area and still just knock dudes out with the left hook. That's how tricky it is as a counterpunch. But I think like the threat of leaning on the head and throwing knees and things like that is part of what stops it from being very effective in MMA. And of course, like the whole point of having the gloves by the chin is that you're sort of relying on them padding out the chin a bit if you do get hit. And in MMA, I especially like dudes staying down behind bones rather than padding. Like, you want to put your shoulders in the way, you want to put your forearms in the way. You want to bar shots close to the point of launch rather than trying to block them close to the point of contact. But I think there's plenty of potential. I think if someone really studied Tyson and tried to put it into effective MMA, they'd have a lot of fun and success. I think if you put Tyson's shifts out to the side and throw the right hook and things like that, if you put that into like the context of someone breaking from the clinch, guys like Volkanovski and John Jones do great work freeing their hands from the clinch along the fence and then striking. And I think that's where that sort of peekaboo head body head stuff and angling off really works well. I also think the guys don't really throw enough jabs in MMA for your peekaboo style to really pay off that much anyway. If you want to like counter a jab or enter off the opponent's jab with a counter, the best way is to just jab and know that they'll jab back. Like, that's probably a best solution in MMA, or to move forwards like static and wait for it. You're not really in the position where you're fighting heavyweight boxers who are going to throw dozens of jabs around. But yeah, there's potential there. There's lots of stuff about that game that's really interesting. If you watch like a Kevin Rooney clip of him showing the various jumps and shifts in the corners of the ring, like, he'll teach people that. And those movements are really interesting because they take you out of, well, you're not really in like a hitting stance a lot of the time. The feet are very close together when you see Rooney and people like that teaching it. But it does afford some interesting mobility and allow you to shift into different stances on different sides. And I very much like that. But I think in the years to come, you're going to see a lot of guys taking various influences from boxing and putting them into MMA. One thing I've noticed in MMA gyms is that dudes watch a lot of boxing and a lot of jiu-jitsu and things like that. Even if they're not that into MMA, guys will try and steal ideas from everywhere. And I love that. I think that's the best thing about MMA. I remember I trained in Tokyo and I was just, what was I doing? I think I was like on the treadmill or something like that. And Kyoji Horiguchi was behind the desk watching Manny Pacquiao stuff. And Kyoji Horiguchi was like 15, 14. I don't know how old he was, but he was a child at the time. but he was just like mimicking. It was the Manny Pacquiao clip of him like doing 100 uppercuts really, really fast, wearing a hat and like his running clothes. And Horiguchi was doing it, and I was going, you know. And then little did I know, years later, he was like one of the top flyweights in the world and bantamweights. And who knows how Pacquiao's influenced his style, but he was enjoying watching a lot of Pacquiao. You know, I wouldn't watch him and go, there's a lot of Pacquiao influence there, but maybe he thinks there is. Anyway, cheers, Tommy. Right, I reckon that'll do us for today. I am working on some Israel Adesanya stuff. I was working on a big study. If you haven't read the Moicano one, go read it, because I haven't done like a single fighter study in a long time. And I sort of regret doing it because it just makes people think that you're picking that fighter for some retarded reason. But I do prefer doing them. It's like a more fun way of doing it, just going through all of the fighters' fights and going, look at these interesting trends and how he adapted his style for this particular opponent. It's a little bit more fun for me than doing like the so-and-so versus so-and-so stylistic matchup thing. I'll do both in future, but like it's just fun to get back to it. And I'm working on something like that for Adesanya. Don't know where I'll publish it yet. I'm shopping it around because obviously Vice closed down half their departments over the weekend. If you want to support the Patreon, we've got a Boxer Rebellion episode coming up this week, and I'll probably do something secret for the Patreon boys in the next couple of weeks too. And then we're back on Muhammad Ali after that. We're going to be doing we're going to be doing Fight of the Century and sort of like the fallout of the Nation of Islam stuff and the draft board. It's going to get a bit political, but you know we'll keep it cool. And if you want to follow what I'm up to at any time, fightprimer.com. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com, and I will catch you probably Thursday. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Fightland bless.